Welcome back, guys. I'm glad you're here today. And once again, we are studying from the book of Numbers about Moses. And I want to encourage all of you to be saying your verses at home with your moms and dads. Boys and girls, God always helps his people get ready for the future. And that's what God was doing for his people before they entered the promised land. God told Moses he wanted him to do something very specific before they entered. And Moses told the people, God wants me to count how many people, how many grown-ups are in each family before we go into the promised land so that we will have enough land for each family to raise their animals and grow their crops. There were a lot of Israelites. It must have taken a long time to count so many people, but that's exactly what each family began the count, and soon every family finished counting, and Moses wrote down the numbers. What a big help it was to have counted the people. Now, before the Israelites went into the promised land, they knew which families were the smallest and which families were the largest. Simeon's family was the smallest, so he would not need as much land. Judah's family was huge, so they would need a land, but not quite. Before they would be ready to live in their new land, the Israelites had to get rid of the enemies who already lived in the land. 5 kings lived in that land. They liked that beautiful land. The grass was good for their sheep, cattle, and donkeys. They did not want to leave. But boys and girls, these kings and the people there did not love God. They would not have obeyed God. They worshipped idols, and God knew that if the Israelites did not get rid of the enemies, these evil kings would try to make God's people love and worship idols instead of the one true God. Moses announced, "We must send some of our men across the river to fight and get rid of these enemies of God." Each family chose men to fight for God. Some of the men were fathers, some were not, but every family sent a man to fight, just as Moses told them. When just the right number of men had been chosen, they came together and listened to Moses before they crossed the river. Moses reminded all the people, God has said that we are to fight against his enemies. God will help our men win against these evil people. Then Moses chose the priest Phinehas to go with the Israelite soldiers. Phinehas loved God and would remind the men that God loved them and would help them. Phinehas picked up his silver trumpet and he blew it. The Israelite soldiers had been waiting for this sound. The trumpet blast was the signal to go. Hearing the trumpet, the men began to move out. Their feet marched to the beautiful rhythm Phinehas blew. Families stood watching. They waved as the men marched out of the camp and went across the river to the other side. The other side is where the 5 kings and their soldiers lived, who were the enemies of God. I'm sure that night, as families in the camp got ready for bed, many Israelite mothers with their children prayed for the men they loved who had marched away that day. When the sun rose in the morning, the Israelites waited to hear about their men. They watched the river where the soldiers had crossed over to the other side. All day the Israelites thought of their soldiers and wondered what is happening to them. Day after day passed, and the people waited. Then one day they heard a strange loud noise coming from the other side of the river. Was the enemy coming, or would it be their own soldiers returning? The sound came from animals. Suddenly they could see sheep and donkeys and cattle splashing in the river and marching into their camp. Behind the animals marched the Israelite men. A shout sounded out across the camp. Hooray, they're back! Our men have returned. Out went everyone running to meet the returning soldiers. Fathers who were soldiers stopped and knelt down and reached out their arms to hug their children as they ran to welcome them home. What a happy day it was. Happily, the men told how God had helped them and kept them safe. All of the men who went with us have come back safely. They are all here, they said, but our enemies are gone. God has helped us defeat the enemy kings and their soldiers. Look at all these animals. And not only that, look at all the huge amounts of gold and jewelry that we have gotten from God's enemies. Right away, they gave the animals and the gold to Moses. Moses accepted the gifts from the soldiers, but he was not going to keep the gold and the animals. First, Moses counted it all. Then he began to divide it. Part of the animals and gold Moses returned to the soldiers to keep. Another part of the sheep, donkeys, and cattle he gave to the people who had stayed in the camp. But most importantly, Moses gave part of the animals and gold for an offering to God. God had taken care of the Israelite soldiers. God had helped them get rid of the enemy kings. God had helped his people get ready to move across the river to the promised land. Boys and girls, God always takes care of his people and knows what is best for his people. Thanks for being here today.